All right. How's everyone's week been?
Well, pretty good.
Very good.
Good. I'm going to pull up the...
Wednesday was absolutely gorgeous.
It was. We had a very lovely weather week, didn't we?
Golf on Wednesdays, and it was just so pretty.
Yes, it was. It's true. It wasn't very Augusty, but that's okay.
No. But
kind of
was
October.
it May or June seemed more like August because of the, it was so hot in there.
Right.
There was a few weeks in there that was 90 something and it shouldn't have been yet.
Right. So it's payback, I guess, huh?
Yeah.
All righty. So today we are talking about Esther. So let me just, I think I'm set here to go. Yeah. All right. Well, let's begin with a prayer then. And welcome everybody. I've got the blessed cup here today.
Oh, that's
right. I think this is Father Ashmore's cup, but we share. We wash, of course, but we share mugs. So, all right. Well, let's begin. In the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit.
Amen.
Amen. Heavenly Father, we thank you that we are blessed. We thank you for all the blessings that you give us. We thank you for the blessing of your holy word, the opportunity to learn and study your word. We ask that you would be with us today as we look at the story of Esther. We ask all this through Christ our Lord. Amen.
Amen.
All right. So now is the time that I mute y'all.
I think he likes this power thing here.
I will turn you all off. Okay. There we go. Y'all muted now. Go to the share the screen. Esther. All right, so this will conclude our jaunt through the summer reading, the Bible studies. As it was suggested by Karen, next week is the Feast of the Assumption. We do have an 8:30 Mass, so I'll start Bible study at 9:15 next week. That's a good idea. I don't have the Mass, so I wasn't even thinking in those terms, but then people can do both. They can. I mean, presumably it'll be about a 45-minute Mass. I can't really go later than 9:15. So if you get here a little bit late, that's okay. You can go back and watch. Oh, I've still got hold on. I got to backtrack. I see it. Doop. So we'll have 8:30 Mass of Assumption and then 9:15 Bible study. I can't really go later than that because we got the 10:30 Spanish Bible study and I've got the 12:15 Mass. So trying to squeeze in a Bible study as well on the Feast of the Assumption. As you might have seen the news report possibly that was posted yesterday, it's obviously not a holy day of obligation because it's not only COVID time, but also Saturday, and Saturdays generally mean that the obligation to attend Mass is lifted, but it is a big feast, so we want to offer a couple Masses. So 8:30 and 12:15. But next week, the next 3 weeks, then we'll jump back into do some Paul. We haven't done Paul for a while, and there's a lot of Paul to cover, so I try to spread them out. Not everyone loves Paul, but some people do love Paul. I love Paul. He's Bible, and so I thought we'd do that. Eventually, I want to get into some of those other ones like Timothy, Titus, Peter. Those other ones as well, but that's not happening now. And Hebrews, James. So I've kind of plotted out some other things into the future, but this is what we got here now. So 3 weeks of Paul and 3 weeks of prophets. So that's what we will be doing from there, I'm going to take a little 2-week break so I can prepare myself for the prophets. All righty. So we are on the book of Esther, and I've used, you might have noticed that I'm using the same kind of this fun background for these 3 books. So I'm just going in and updating the previous weeks. It was Tobit, Judith, and now Esther. And so it's possible that I have forgotten to change a Judith to an Esther. So if any of these happen to say Judith, oops, I think I changed them all. But I am using this kind of template just to kind of tie all these 3 together, kind of give a little thematic thing as well. And they're about of as fun as the Bible books can get, I think, these 3. But no beheading this week, so that's good. So let's give a little bit of background first to Esther. Esther is weird in the fact that it is quite confusing to read as you jump into it, because let me pull up my 2 different Bibles. Because normally Bible 101 is how do you find things in the Bible? You look at a book, chapter, and verse. So it's the book, chapter 2, verse 3, whatever. Except, of course, in Esther, where it might be chapter B or chapter A, and it gets a little confusing. So why is that? And then, if you're looking at some of them, like Carol, if you're looking in your Ascension Press Bible, what chapter does it begin with? Starting with chapter 11. Let's start there. So it's, wait a minute, what is going on? So it could be a little weird to jump into it at the beginning. So if you're looking in the Revised Standard, it might start with chapter 11 or something. And if you are in the New American, it starts with the chapter A. So it's very strange what's going on. But here's what's going on. I've talked about the 2 canons the last couple of weeks. If you missed that, you can go back and see that in the previous session. So you've got the 2 canons, the Hebrew canon and the Greek canon. What's my next thing? Okay. So remember that in the Protestant Reformation, the Protestants did not take out books of the Bible, and the Catholics didn't put in books of the Bible. It was that there were 2 different canons. There was what was in Hebrew and what was in Greek back in the time. And Esther is an interesting kind of hybrid, because parts of it exist in Hebrew, but not all of what we now accept as the book of Esther is in Hebrew. That part was in Greek, which is an interesting story, I think. I was trying to kind of get some background to that, but I don't want to get too far ahead of myself, but but anyway, so it's very strange when you read it to begin with. Is you've got this strange organization, and what is happening is you've got the original Hebrew, which is chapters, I guess, 1 through 10, I think, 1 through 10. And then you've got 6 extra chapters, and depending on where you're reading, it's chapter 11, verse 6 through 16, or chapter, A through F. So those are parts in the Greek that have been added. Now, I think most Bibles then, as the introduction says, at least in the Revised Standard one that I have here, is they have now put those things inserted properly into the story where they would fit. Some editions of the Bible then also do the whole Hebrew thing, and then have here's 11 through 16, and then they just kind of plop all that stuff at the end instead of inserting it. So I don't know which Bible you're reading, but it could be pretty confusing as to know where things are going. But that's the history. It's a hybrid. Part of the book is in Hebrew, was originally in Hebrew and not in Greek. And then the Greek added some stuff to flesh it out, but they didn't do that in the Hebrew. So that's a bit confusing as you're jumping into Esther. But here's the thing, in the Hebrew version, there is no mention of God. And I think that's very interesting about a biblical book that has no mention of God. And I think that's one of the main reasons that the Greek inserted, the later early Jewish community said, we need to work on our God thing here because there's not really any mention of God here. And let's give a more spiritual sense to this. Which some of the commentators say that actually lessens the power of the story. And some would say it really builds it. And I think arguments can be made for both. And I think one of the nice things about the hybrid is one of the Catholic senses is it's both and. We can accept both of those things. Don, you were at Father Mark's dad's funeral, he used that phrase as well, that both and. It's both of these things. It's both the limited version and it's the expanded version. And we don't reject one or the other. We accept them both. And we accept that there can be a very powerful story just by reading the Hebrew. And there can be a very powerful story expanding upon what we hear about in the Greek version. So it's both. We accept both of those. So I think I would encourage people to read it without the Greek stuff and also with the Greek stuff. So without chapters 11 through 16 and with chapters 11 to 16, or with or without the number, the lettering system, I think that can be a good way to read it both ways. I was trying to think of an example, and maybe someone else can throw out in the comments of something that originally stands on its own pretty well, and then it gets extra spiritualized or extra explanations. And some people might find that helpful, and then some people are like, why'd you put all that in there? I got it. It was clear to me before. Why'd you need to add all this extra stuff? But I couldn't think of any good examples when I was preparing that. Maybe you have some ideas, but sometimes I think we over spiritualize things or over explain things that really stood on their own just fine before. So why'd you add all this stuff? So I also compare it to, this is I don't know, I pulled off the internet. This is a picture of the Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat, one of my favorite musicals. But interestingly, also in the Genesis part of the story of Joseph, there is similarly really no mention of God either, or the story really goes on without God, or at least that's how the story is presented. There's not an overt reference to God neither in Esther nor in the Joseph story. So let's locate Esther in time. That's not a very good quality picture. Oh, well. So King Ahasuerus. That's another fun pronounceable name. Ahasuerus, or Xerxes the First. He reigned from 485 to 465. And Esther 1:3 says in the third year of his reign. So the story takes place in 485 BC-ish. So much easier to locate when the story takes place. I made a typo. Sorry, that should say 482. 482 BC-ish. So that's a typo. So we can pretty much identify if King Xerxes the First reigned from this year, and this took place in the third year of his reign. Well, then it's 482 there where the story takes place. And again, pretty much all the scholars say it's not we're still in our kind of historical fiction section. We're in our folk tale section. So most scripture scholars that I know of do not count this as like history, but more of a story that has a historical basis. And it has a different intention than telling a historical tale. It wants to tell something different. So like Tobit and Judith, this sits in that kind of folk tale or the historical fiction segment of the Bible. And if we locate Esther in space, time and space, the story takes place in Susa in the Persian Empire. And then there's Jerusalem over there. Oops, so that's a layer, that's a holdover from last week's. I had a cut in section there. Didn't delete that little arrow. So that is where the story takes place, in the Persian Empire in Susa. Now, again, I look at lots of commentaries and books and stuff as I prepare these things. So this one, so I'm gonna read here from the Collegeville Bible Commentary. It's a pretty thick book, but it's pretty readable. I think it's unlike my other book, the New Jerome Biblical Commentary. That one's pretty technical. And this one is I think much easier to read. So the Collegeville Bible Dictionary, this is just the Old Testament. There's also a New Testament one, which I don't think I even have, but because I've got other New Testament things I refer to, but this is a pretty good overview of the New Testament books. But I'd like to read how the introduction to what James Fisher says about introducing this book of the Bible, because I think it's great. It kind of sets the tone of what we are reading. It says, the Hebrew book of Esther is a melodrama. I like that. The Hebrew book of Esther is a melodrama. When the story was read in the synagogue during the feast of Purim, the men stomped their feet, banged the tables, hissed the villain, and cheered the hero. It was a riotous celebration with much drinking. Too much, in quotes, too much was when one could not tell the difference between bless Mordecai and curse Haman, said some rabbis. In medieval times, Purim became kind of a carnival celebration with dramatizations of the story spinning off from the biblical tale. I think that really sets the tone of Esther. It's a melodrama where if you want to read it and you introduce Mordecai and you introduce Esther and you go, ah, hooray, and you hear Haman and a boo, boo. So as you are reading this, I invite you to add your own boos and hisses and hoorays. That will make it more fun reading. So consider it kind of as a melodrama. And that's kind of the idea. Now that's, again, in the original sense. And then I think that there was, again, sometimes, let's see here, how do I say this? Sometimes religious folks get a little worried about partying. You can't smile. You can't celebrate. You can't have fun. God does not want us to have any fun. This is too much fun. We need to spiritualize it. And so I think that's kind of the sense of, but there's dragons and curses and the angelic beings and everything. Let's make sure we don't have too much fun with this. So I think that's kind of another sense to read. Kind of the Greek edition is, wait. This is getting out of control. There's too much banging on the tables. Let's bring it back. God, religious, walk around here, hands folded. Let's get ourselves organized here. This is Bible, guys. So it's less of a melodrama when you read the version that we have as is. And the term Esther apparently means star in Persian. So she is the star of the story. So again, here's the cast of main characters, and it's a pretty small cast, really, as far as main characters go. So you got Ahasuerus is the king of Persia. You've got Mordecai, who is a Jew, and an uncle or a cousin, some sort of relative. It's always a little bit unclear to know what everyone's relations are in the Old Testament there. And then you've got Esther, who is the Jewish maiden taken into the king's harem. So everyone go, yay! Okay. And then you've got Haman, and everyone go, boo! He is our top advisor. So Esther is our heroine, and Haman is our villain. He's gonna twist his mustache. I'll get you next time. So that's basically the cast of characters. There are other people that appear in the story, but these are the main people. You got some eunuchs that get beheaded, or no, they get hung. Sorry. And you've got some other folks. You got the Queen Vishta, but she makes a very small appearance in the story, and we'll go through the story then. So, but the main cast of characters, it's basically these four: the king, the Jewish advisor, Esther, and Haman. So here's the brief overview then of the story. So again, in the version that we have here, in the Greek version, we start off with the dream of Mordecai. We spiritualize this whole sense. But what it does, it does flesh out the story. It helps us to understand who the characters are. We get the history of who Mordecai is. So it says in the first, in chapter A, verse 1, it says, Mordecai, son of Jair, son of Shimi, son of Kish, of the tribe of Benjamin, had a dream. So we get kind of set up of who he is. And he was a Jew residing in the city of Susa, a prominent man who served in the king's court. And one of the captives. So it gives us the sense, and he had this dream that there was this noise, tumult, thunder, an earthquake, confusion upon the earth. And again, in these sections, that's where we hear about God. They cried out to God, and as they cried, there appeared forth a great river. I also like in this version, I should have been reading out of this one, the Revised Standard here, it has it in italics. So that's kind of helpful as well to say, okay, this is the Greek version. All the italics part are the stuff that's not in the other Bibles. So again, if you are talking to your Protestant friends, your Protestant brothers and sisters, and talk about Mordecai's dream, they will look at you in a strange way, like, what are you talking about? Because that's not in their Bibles. They would just have the non-italicized or the they wouldn't have chapters A through F, because that is not in the Protestant Bibles, at least as far as I understand. Okay. So then we have the dream of Mordecai. Then we have the banquet of King Ahasuerus. And this is a very interesting piece. And yeah, one of the lessons here, which is, so King Ahasuerus has a feast, and he demands that his queen come and participate here on in the feasting. And it says here, on the seventh day, when the heart of the king, so this is chapter 1, verse 10. On the seventh day, when the heart of the king was merry with wine, he commanded these 7 eunuchs to bring Queen Vashti before the king with her royal crown, in order to show the peoples and the princes her beauty, for she was fair to behold. But Queen Vashti refused to come into the king's command conveyed by the eunuchs. At this, the king was enraged, and his anger burned within him. Now let's pause for a moment. This is quite reasonable, I think, of Queen Vashti. The poor Queen Vashti. And it does not set up King Ahasuerus as a great noble fellow either, because if this was put into modern times, and there is a movie, a fairly recent movie of Esther. I haven't seen it. But I would imagine, so King Ahasuerus, who's merry with wine, says, "Come out, honey, show off." And the queen says, "You're drunk, and I am not coming out and participating in this." It's a fair thing for Queen Vashti to say, right? No. I put my foot down. Well, the king is not happy that she puts her foot down, and he basically banishes him and makes the rule, because now you're going to make all it's really kind of terrible. You're going to make all of the husbands look bad if you let her boss you around. Don't you do this. Again, this is a Persian king. This isn't even part of the empire, so not part of the Jewish people. So the advisors say, if you let her do this, you're going to look weak and she's going to look strong. So you got to get rid of her and set a lesson for all the other husbands in Persia that this is not acceptable behavior by women. So stop it. So king says, "Yep, that sounds good. So we'll kick out the woman." Again, melodrama. Think, oh, this kind of goofy whatever king. So Queen Vashti is banished. She's kicked out, and of course now King Ahasuerus needs a new queen. And so, but that also sets up the story pretty well. As like, this probably is not going to go very well for Esther either, because we do not have a very good example of a queen. So now we have the election of Esther. I didn't put the chapters in here. I should have, but it's a fairly straightforward and brief story. So read through it as you will. So so it's in chapter 2, verse 5. Chapter 2, verse 5. Now there was a Jew in Susa with capitals whose name was Mordecai, and again we've already been introduced to him through the introduction, but that wasn't in the Hebrew version. Son of Kish, who had been carried away by Jerusalem, blah 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 blah. So when the king's order and his edict were proclaimed, many of the maidens were gathered in Susa, the capital, in the custody of Haggai. Esther was also taken into the king's palace and put into custody of Haggai, who had charged the women. And the maiden pleased him and won his favor. So this is chapter 2, verse 9. Maiden pleased him and won his favor, and he quickly provided her with ointments and portion of food, and with 7 chosen maids from the king's palace, advanced her and her maids into the best place in the harem. Esther had not made known her people or kindred, for Mordecai had charged her not to make it known. So basically, this is the ancient episode of The Bachelor. So the king needs a new queen, and so here's King Ahasuerus going through and selecting, and Esther wins. Now I know you might take great comfort knowing that I've watched absolutely 0 episodes of The Bachelor, but I think I've got the premise at least somewhat. So this is kind of your ancient Bachelor episode. So the king needs a queen, and he goes and selects. And of course, there wasn't just, there was kind of the favorite queen, and then there were the others. And I thought this was an interesting thing too. It says now in chapter 3, verse 12, sorry, chapter 2, verse 12, chapter 2, verse 12. Now, when the turn came for each maiden to go into King Ahasuerus after being 12 months under the regulations for the women, since this was the regular period of their beautifying, I think that's humorous. 6 months with the oil of myrrh, and 6 months with the spices and ointments for women. And when the maiden went into the king, when his way was, she was taken with whatever she desired to take with her from the harem to the king's palace. So you have this beautifying thing. It sounds like they're getting ready for the fair or something. Like let's prepare all the women, and so they can be presented and see if they can get blue ribbons or whatever those are. So Esther then gets all the other women get prepared and beautified or whatever. So it's kind of a strange story. But again, these are Persian customs. These are not Jewish. This is not the Jewish way of things, but they are living, remember, in a strange land and participating to a certain extent in the Persian customs. And that's an important piece. Remember, this is part of the exile story where they are not in their own land and they are trying to live as faithful Jews in a foreign land. So that's a key point to this story, which leads into point number 4 of the story. Okay. So then chapter 3, we've got Haman. Boo, Haman. After these things, King Ahasuerus promoted Haman the Agagite. That's a fun word to say, Agagite. The son of Hamadatha, and advanced him to set the seat above all the princes who were with him. So he's like the chamberlain or the big official guy. And all the king's servants who were at the king's gates bowed down and did obeisance. Obeisance? That's a word I don't really know. What's the word? Say it in American. All the king's servants who were at the royal gate would kneel and bow to Haman. For this is what the king had ordered in his regard. Okay, but obeisance, that's your word for the day. For the king had so commanded concerning him. But Mordecai did not bow down or do obeisance. The king's servants who were at the king's gate said to Mordecai, "Why do you transgress against the king's command?" And then we spoke to him day after day. He would not listen. They told Haman in order to see whether Mordecai's words would avail, for he had told them that he was a Jew. And when Haman saw that Mordecai did not bow down or do obeisance to him, Haman was filled with fury. But he disdained to lay hands on Mordecai alone, so they had made known to him the people of Mordecai. Haman sought to destroy all the Jews, the people of Mordecai, throughout the whole kingdom of Ahasuerus. So Haman notices that Mordecai, because his allegiance is not to the king, but it's to his people, his religion. Now, there's a vague reference here to God, but it's not really mentioned. But he says, but the implication is you do not bow, you do not kneel down to the king. You only do that to God. Now, it's not said, but that is what is implied there, is because he is faithful, a faithful Jew, he will not bow down to the king. So I was reminded, this is before my time, is there was there's John F. Kennedy. There was a plot, I guess, back when John F. Kennedy was being elected. I hear there was a great concern that you can't elect a Catholic as the president because he is going to be faithful to, he's going to be a papist, and he can't be faithful to the country because he's going to be faithful to Rome, and we can't have him as president. I hear that was some of the rhetoric that was aimed at John F. Kennedy because he was not going to listen to the Constitution. He was going to listen to whatever the Pope said. And so I was reminded of this kind of thing. Is one of the big themes of Esther is how do you live with your final authority not going to your nation, but to your God. And I think that, so we are an election year, aren't we? And so I think this could be applicable as well, that who do you bow down to? Do you bow down to a political party or do you bow down to God? And people will push you and hate you and try to eliminate you if you say, I have a higher authority than the Democrats, or I have a higher authority than the Republicans or the libertarians or whatever. My authority, my allegiance, I do not bow down to that. I might like aspects of what they are doing, but I do not bow down. That's very similar here. That's, I think, cause for our reflection here of what Mordecai does. He says, I cannot give my final allegiance to you because I bow down only to God. So just a kind of thought there. Okay. So Haman wants to destroy the Jews because they are not controllable. They are not, they will not give their full authority to the king of Persia. So then he plots to destroy all the Jews. Okay. So he sends out this document to go out to destroy all the Jews. And then here is where our hero comes into play. So Mordecai goes out and begs Esther, because she was selected by the bachelor and has the ear of the king, to convince the king not to let this plot happen. Now, this is also interesting because the king is fickle. Someone was comparing it to, I think, in a Shakespearean Henry VIII, but I don't remember my Shakespearean plays all that well. But he's a fickle king who, yeah, whatever I want to do is I'm the law of the land. And so it was particularly dangerous if the king didn't summon you and says, I want you to speak to me, then you were not to speak to the king. So the king got to have every sort of say whatever he wanted. And so Mordecai is encouraging Esther to do something quite dangerous that really could cost her her life. We've also seen, I've kind of skipped over some of the hangings that happened. So King Ahasuerus is getting rid of people as he sees fit. And so the stage has been set that this is very risky for Esther to go in and plea for the life of her people. Now, again, remember, the king does not know that she is a Jew. She has kept this identity secret to the king. And so, Mordecai begs Esther, please, for the sake of our people, you are one of us. You are a Jew. Please beg the king to stop this elimination of our people. So then we have these inserts that happen. Mordecai's prayer, and that's in the italics in the Revised Standard, because there's all kinds of mention of God, and that is not the way that Esther was originally written, but we got all these prayers, this big long prayer of Mordecai, this big long prayer of Esther. And it was important for the editors to remind people that we don't have anything of our own power, that everything comes from God. And that was not immediately evident in the Esther story. So they had to make sure that you reminded, this is not your own power, Esther. This comes from God. So, okay. Okay, so then Esther goes in and goes in to talk to the king. Okay, so chapter 15, and this is interesting because part of it is in italics, and this is helpful because it does open up the story. On the third day, she came in, she worshiped. She stood before the king. Okay, so she first, goes in all this mourning and weeping and sackcloth and all these Jewish things, begging God. And then she re-beautifies herself and goes and presents herself to the king. So she comes up to the king. It's very dramatic here. Lifting his face, filled with splendor, he looked at her with fierce anger, because what are you doing in my court? You should not be here if I don't summon you. And the queen faltered and turned pale and faint and collapsed on the head of the maid who went before her. Then God changed the spirit of the king to gentleness. Oh, it's God's doing. And an alarm sprang from his throne and took her into his arms. She came to herself. Okay, and then says, "What is Esther? What do you want?" And then encourages her. And the king said to her, "What is it, Queen Esther? What is your request? It shall be given to you, even half of my kingdom." That sounds familiar, doesn't it? We've heard that in the gospel, right? Before the beheading of John the Baptist. And Esther said, "If it please the king, let the king and Haman come to this day to dinner." And okay, then we have another banquet. So we had an earlier banquet. So she's saying, "Please bring Haman and Mordecai to this banquet." Okay. Then Mordecai makes plans to Haman has plans to have Mordecai hanged on the gallows. So he makes these gallows ready to hang Mordecai for his lack of obeisance to the king. So he goes up. He's really happy. He's going to kill off Mordecai. And then Esther makes this plea, "Please, Lord, please, my king, I am a Jew, and Haman, you love me here so much, you treasure me, and Haman is making a plan to kill all of the people, and these are my people that you are talking about." And the king is enraged at Haman, and has Haman then hanged on the very gallows that he had prepared for Mordecai. So there's great rejoicing and banging on the tables, and the villain has been dispatched. So in chapter 7, here it says, "What is your petition, Queen Esther? It shall be granted to you. And what is your request?" The Queen Esther answered, "If I found favor in your sight, O king, and if it please the king, let my life be given me at my petition, and my people at my request, for we are sold, and my people to be destroyed, to be slain. If we had been sold merely as slaves, women and men, I would have held my peace, for our affliction is not to be compared to the loss of the king." And who is he? And who is he that was presumed to do this? And Esther said, "A foe, an enemy, this wicked Haman." And then Haman was in terror, and the king rose in wrath, and Haman begs for his life, and he will have nothing of it. So, okay, so then makes this plea, saves the Jews. The king then says, "We are not going to eliminate the Jews." The Jews rise up, defend themselves. Anyone that comes after them, they get rid of. And so it's a great hero victory for the Jewish people there in Persia. And then we have the celebration of Purim, which is at the chapter 9, the celebration, the Feast of Lots, with celebration of Purim, which is a big feast, apparently, for the Jewish people. There is a pretty humorous movie called For Your Consideration, if you are a Christopher Guest fan. Christopher Guest is the one who did, he does these kind of fake documentaries. So he's famous for Best in Show, Spinal Tap, although he just was in that. He didn't direct that. There was Waiting for Guffman. This is one of those series where this one looks less like a documentary, though. But anyway, it's the story about this movie, and the original title was called Home for Purim. But nobody knows what Purim is. So it's a running joke. It's like, nobody knows the Feast of Purim. So they had to change it to Home for Passover or something like that. And then there's buzz about getting nominated for the Academy Award. It's a pretty funny movie. But anyway, I always think of For Your Consideration when I think of Purim. And they sing this whole song. And one of the scenes, they sing the song of Esther, and they're rejoicing with Esther. So they celebrate the whole feast. So that's a movie. The movie is actually called For Your Consideration, but the movie that they're making in For Your Consideration was originally called Home for Purim, which they changed to, I think it's Home for Passover. I don't remember. But all right. So what are the lessons then we learned from this book of Esther? How do we live in a world that is hostile to religion? And that's a great question that Esther is addressing. When you are a stranger in a strange land, when you're trying to live your faith faithfully, how do you live that? And especially when you are being attacked at every side, how do you maintain that? And Esther provides that a great lesson there. and one ordinary person can stand up to tyranny and change the world. And that's really one of the other pieces of Esther, is that she goes in and pleads for mercy and pleads that this will not be done to her people. And she changes the heart of the king. She gets rid of the villain, the evil that's in her sight, and saves people, and basically single-handedly. So one person really can change the world. So I think those are good things for us to consider. And I think that the story stands well as just the Hebrew piece. And it also stands well with the Greek additions that give us some further things to reflect upon of what does this mean for our lives. So those are the basic messages of the story of Esther, and a basic overview to the story. So there we are, the book of Esther. Again, here's the upcoming schedule. We'll do 9:15 on August 15th to allow people to go to Mass either virtually or in personally. You might be a little bit late if for 9:15 next week, but well, there it is. You can catch up, I guess. But I can't really go any later, so don't want to run to the Spanish session, and then I got the Spanish Mass at 12:15 also, so I can't bop things back too much. But I'll do 9:15. All right, so we'll stop the share. Oh, I need to exit there. Stop the share. All right. So I'm watching over here on the Facebook. I can watch over on the YouTube as well. Unmute all. Mute all. All right. So there is Esther. Let me know if you have any questions here. I'm watching the Facebook. I'm watching the YouTube. Hopefully that's clear and helpful. And got another book under our belts. Any thoughts or questions?
I'd have to say I have several.
Great.
Probably don't want to hear them all.
Okay.
The whole kneeling thing kind of comes out right now. I mean, there's a lot of people, well, not a lot of people, several people on the sports teams that aren't kneeling because they're Christians. So that just pops out to me. But
not kneeling.
I don't see it.
but they only kneel to God.
No.
Oh, sure. That was another interesting thing about the whole, like with the Black Lives Matter and everything.
Mhm.
And do you kneel or do you stand for the national anthem? That's that's a whole other interesting thing, and I don't know if I have the right answer on any of that either. But yeah,
kind of the inverse of what Esther teaches. You know, that in Esther, he refuses to kneel because he only gives homage to God. And in the athletic situation, they are kneeling rather than standing for the national anthem because they are protesting against the country. So it's not a religious thing, I don't think, Patty.
I think
Some of the people are not kneeling, and the reason they're not kneeling is because they're Christian.
right. So it's the next step.
But it's
So
still
some people are kneeling.
Yeah, I see what you're saying.
So a protest to the protest is this.
Now that's the part I missed. Sorry.
Yeah.
Thanks for explaining.
Well,
I have a funny comment when you were saying that about bring that in about President Kennedy. This was in my own family. My mother-in-law was a very devout Baptist, and I didn't see her that often. And then after Kennedy did get elected, she said to me very quietly, she said, "Well, we were so afraid that the Pope was going to come over on the next boat." Yeah. And that was their feeling, you know. So I thought it was, you know, it was apropos at the time.
Mm-hmm.
well, that brings up something else. Have you noticed they don't push the fact that Biden is Catholic? And when they do, I get very upset because I'm like, he's not Catholic. I mean, he might think he is, but I don't see it. I think he's a very poor example of Catholicism.
let's not to get too out of control here. I was pulling in Kennedy here, kind of in the past here.
I know. That's why I said you probably don't want to hear everything I'm thinking here.
Sure. I mean, and if we were not live on the entire world on Facebook and YouTube, this might be a good conversation in the social hall. But
okay. Bringing it back to,
that's a fair thing, and I think that's a fair observation. Yes, but I don't want to branch more than that. So
okay.
I think that's a good observation, a good connection. But let's not get into it. Let's not go further and say, well, now I say, let's good observation. Let's not go further.
I admire your wisdom, Father Kent. Stay away from politics altogether. I do the same thing if I possibly can.
Well, I think we can nudge. We can say, this reminds me of this. This makes me think of this, without making too many conclusions from there. But
and that's a good point.
And I would say the same thing with the whole Black Lives Matter and the kneeling thing. Yes, I can see those connections. I don't want to come down and make too many conclusions of, well, therefore we need to do this. I think we just observe and we say, at least for this point, and then we can prayerfully consider what we do in our own lives with that. Okay, Patty, you had something else.
All right, I was going to talk about Mordecai actually saved the king from that plot that they were going to kill the king. And this was even before Esther was the queen. And that was a really kind of a cool thing, that Haman was going to hang him. And then Esther reminded the king that Mordecai saved him. And then all of a sudden, Mordecai gets all these awesome rewards that Haman has to give him.
Right.
Who hates him.
Good point. Good.
I really like that part.
Yeah. Good addition.
So I like Esther. What can I say?
Yeah. I do too. Yeah.
I think it's a good book. I didn't realize that the A's and B's, I didn't even notice that until you said that.
Oh, I had.
I mean, I was reading along. I just didn't notice the chapter set A, chapter A, and then chapter 1, and then.
That's the first thing. Yeah, that's the first thing that I noticed when I open up the book. I'm like, A.
Wow.
Or especially if you read in the Revised Standard that I got, it starts off with chapter 11. I'm like,
what happened to the first 10?
But it has an explanation there at the end there of.
So 11 through 16 is A through F.
Right.
Okay.
So this is what the note says in the Revised Standard. It says, the disarrangement of the chapter and verse order is due to the insertion of the deuterocanonical portions in their logical place in the story of Esther, as narrated in the Greek version, which they are taken. They are printed in italics to enable the reader to recognize them at once. In the old Vulgate, the old Bible, these portions were placed by Jerome immediately after the Hebrew text of Esther, regardless of their logical position, because he himself did not regard them as canonical. Hence, they became numbered as those chapters. And it has been thought best to leave the chapter and verse numbering unchanged. So that's why at least this version of the Revised Standard did it that way. So it's just always a trick to figure out, what do you do with these extra chapters?
You know, and one of the important things I'm getting out of all of these Bible studies that we're doing with you is, it's always concerned me over the years, the discrepancies within the Bible. And I never could understand that. If it's all coming directly from God and God is perfect, how on earth can there be errors in the Bible, right? Well, you make that make sense. And the discrepancies are no longer important, because it's just like anything else in life. There's no such thing as everything being one way or the other. There's good points on this side, there's good points on that side, and so on and so forth. And I'm looking at the Bible in an entirely different way, because these discrepancies are showing you a broader picture, as opposed to, this is the way it is, that's all there is, go for it or reject it all. You know, it's not the way it works. So thank you very much for that.
I mean, there's certain aspects that are that way. That's true, but I mean, God is always bigger as well. I mean, isn't that what St. Thomas Aquinas said famously at the end of his life? He said, "Everything I've written is sand," or whatever. He said it's, and if he can say that, who wrote tomes and tomes and tomes of theology, and he has this vision of God. I'm like, oh my God, God is so much bigger than I understood. So. The loving God is trying, as a father, is trying to communicate to his children who are all in different places. So as parents, those of you who are parents can probably relate there. You need to tell the truth to your children, but you are going to tell that differently to each child because of who that child is and what they need at that time. You can't just say, "Whoa, there's the truth," because it's not going to make any sense to them. So the loving Father reveals his plan to us as children, but individually, and what we need at that time. And so then the whole Bible helps us to understand this was this moment of communication of the Father to this person, to this community, that they needed at this time. And that helps us then to understand where we are at different points in our lives, and to apply that in our lives as well.
And that also explains how reading the Bible as a child is quite different than reading the Bible as an adult or middle-aged. And even now, going through it this time with you, I'm seeing and learning things I never saw before. And I've been reading the Bible for all my life, And that's what's fascinating about the Bible, is that it does meet your needs in a different way for each stage of your life. Mm-hmm. By the way, Father, while I've got attention, I loved your reference to the Bachelor. Were you taking a look at how the other half lives, maybe?
Did your footnotes anywhere say that instead of hanging, they were impaled? I thought I read that in they were talking about it was more like an impaling. I don't remember where I saw that.
I don't remember seeing that.
I'll have to find it.
Okay.
I thought, oh, gross.
Yeah, I almost put a violence-o-meter on this one because it gets a little gruesome there at the end, but the rise of the Jews.
Let's see.
It's always been interesting to me as well that Israel, the Jews, have been the chosen people from the beginning of written time, I guess. And yet they're the ones that are persecuted over and over
again.
It's almost like, be careful not getting too close to God, because the devil's going to pay attention and you're going to be in trouble. I mean, then there's instances of that as well.
Well, one of the commentaries that I was reading was also interesting about that this is less of a celebratory thing. It's also a warning of trusting too much in the government, because it was doing the comparison, the connection between the 1920s Germany and how many of the Jewish people were really involved, and they served in the First World War as German soldiers, and they were faithful to Germany, and they were contributing members of society and all these things, and then the government just turned on them. So that was an interesting reflection as well, that I mean, there's rejoicing that look what Esther did, but watch your back because the government's coming back at you. So it was an interesting kind of reflection as well on Esther, that what might be immediately read as hooray, we are celebrating, don't take that too seriously, because we don't put our faith in human institutions.
Good point.
It was the footnote on chapter 2, verse 23 in my Bible. It says hanged on a gibbet, impaled, perhaps. Yeah. So I thought that sounded worse than it hanging.
Well, neither of those sound particularly great.
No, neither one.
Choose your method.
Oh, it seemed to me too that the first letter that Haman wrote, the king couldn't overturn it. So
Right. 'Cause
that's why he gave the Jews the permission to defend themselves.
right. Because of the law that stood in place, right? Because it could not be
Right.
changed. Yeah.
Which seems weird. If you're the king and you did it, why couldn't you change it? But
Right.
I mean, because here he's losing all these people now.
Yeah. As I was reading some of the commentaries, it was getting into kind of weird Persian law things and how things could be changed, or if they could be changed. I got a little lost myself about all that stuff.
Yeah.
You know, it's interesting to me that you notice the discrepancy between hanging and impaling also, because that's the first thing that I noticed that got me looking for discrepancies in the Bible, because Judas hanged himself in the Gospels, and you go into Acts and he went out and impaled himself on his sword. So that was the first discrepancy I ever noticed in the Bible, and I never even noticed it on this one. So thank you for pointing that one out, Patty.
Well, had noticed it before until I thought that one time you said you read all the footnotes. And I thought, well, I've read this book, so I'm going to read the footnotes. And then I saw that and I went, oh.
I think the footnotes, particularly in the New American, are really great. And there's something I do miss about the Revised Standard is there's not many footnotes, and I like the footnotes of the New American. But I mean, having both of them are helpful too, because then there's other elements that are brought out. They're different footnotes, and they're different introductions, so they're both helpful, and they're different translations. So, like if you're troubled by the word obeisance, what is that word? Obeisance? Obeisance?
Obeisance? Obeisance?
I guess it means being obedient. So it must have the same root, but obeisance. It's in the Revised Standard.
Oh, because I didn't see it in here.
And that's in the Revised Standard. It's not in the New American.
Okay.
Dawn has a question for you that's written out. It says, do the Jews still celebrate this feast it's talking about at the end?
Yes, and I meant to respond to her, but
I see.
That was just mine was just mine. I just for some reason said privately. So yes, I did respond, but not to everybody. Like, yeah.
And you just have, because it just popped up. Asking you shall receive. How exciting is that?
If you do go to that YouTube and search for Home for Purim or For Your Consideration, you can watch that. Again, it's a comedy, but the movie is. But you can see them celebrating Purim, and they're spinning little thingies, and so I think. I mean, it's not entirely like accurate, like this documentary, and it's a mockumentary actually, but usually the mockumentaries, they get a lot of those things really quite accurate, but then this is only one family and they're doing it several places, things are moved. It's this acting out for a movie that is in the movie For Your Consideration. So it's several steps removed, but the song was still pretty catchy. They had sang a little song together and they sing about Esther. And anyway, you can watch that on YouTube. Actually, maybe I could even provide the link here because I just watched it. Let me see if let me go to my history real quick. Any other questions while I'm looking that up?
Just one quick one about the pandemic itself. Is the Catholic Church all over the world doing the special dispensation for Sunday masses and other holy days, or is it just here in the United States, or do you know?
I don't know. That is the short answer. It's pretty much everywhere, I think.
It didn't come from Rome then, from the Pope, did it?
No. And each place had to make its own kind of decision of what's safe. And there's I'm sure there's some areas. Well, I'm not sure. There might be some areas, very remote areas, that have no problem. And then the bishops there said, we are not taking away the obligation. You still must get to Mass. But pretty much across the United States.
Yeah, I knew it here it was that way, but I just was curious. Since
now
it is a worldwide pandemic,
Now, theoretically, I'm pretty sure that Archbishop Naumann, for instance, could make the decision saying, in this diocese, I am not lifting the the obligation. You still have to come to mass, and if not, it's on pain of mortal sin. And then you have to follow your conscience, I suppose, because someone could still say, okay, I hear you. And that would be an element of conscience, but that could be a bishop decision, I think.
Okay, sort of like states' rights versus the federal government.
Something like that, yeah, I suppose.
Yeah, okay, I was just curious. Thank you, Father. I'm going to exit, and goodbye, everybody else.
All right, thanks, everybody.
Look forward to next week starting at 9:15. Thank you for doing that, by the way.
Anybody else? Any thoughts, questions?
Nope.
All right,
Zipped
Patty,
up.
thanks. Those are great additions, and I missed some points, so
I'm
thanks for that.
sorry.
No, it's good. It's great.
Get a little too
I-
excited.
No, I can't get every detail, so I appreciate that. So even though I read it over and over again, I'm like, I forget some things. So
Well,
those are
some
good.
things probably stick out more to you. And
Exactly. That's why we do Bible studies.
bye.
All right. Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Have a good day.
Bye, Joanne. Bye, everybody.
See you, everybody.